What is happening, everybody? James Hancock here. Just got out of seeing Keeper, the latest horror movie directed by Osgood Perkins, and let me just say, hooray for horror. Horror keeps me sane, horror keeps me happy, and Keeper, it absolutely delivered on that front. And while Perkins might not necessarily be my favorite active director working within the horror genre, because that honor currently belongs to Damian McCarthy, but Osgood Perkins is easily the most prolific director of horror today. And between Longlegs and The Monkey and now Keeper, over the last 2 years, he's managed to throw out a lot of red meat for horror fans to sink their teeth into. And I'm going to avoid spoilers in this video because the mystery of the story and the suspense of the story is a huge part of the movie's appeal, but I totally got my money's worth. There was one scare about halfway through, right around the point where I was starting to lose my patience, but the scare was so intense that I think for a couple seconds I might have had a little miniature heart attack because I couldn't breathe for a couple seconds. I couldn't exhale, I couldn't inhale, but we'll get to all those scares in a bit. But let me just emphasize that I went into this movie knowing absolutely nothing, apart from what I saw in the trailers, which are very mysterious and very beautiful. And I knew this movie was going to be gorgeous, and I think it's the most visually stunning movie yet by Osgood Perkins and his regular cameraman, Jeremy Cox. But let's start with the basics before I start singing this movie's praises. So I've looked at the premise over on IMDb, and I've looked at it over on Wikipedia, and I don't think either site does that great a job in describing the story, but we'll stick with Wikipedia because it has some fascinating production info, which I did not know going into the movie. But here are the basics. Keeper is a 2025 American surrealist horror film written by Nick Leppard and directed by Osgood Perkins. The film stars Tatiana Maslany and Rossif Sutherland. And from people unfamiliar with Rossif Sutherland, I should add, he is the son of the great Donald Sutherland. But here's the premise as they write it. Liz and Malcolm head to a secluded cabin for their anniversary weekend. Liz, alone after Malcolm suddenly returns to the city, is approached by an evil entity that unveils the cabin's secrets. I mean, maybe it's a good thing that the premise is kind of misleading or not necessarily that well written, because I want people to be kind of bewildered and confused going into this. And this movie is going to test the patience of most viewers because it is, let's just say that it teases out little details along the way, but it basically makes you wait like 90% of the movie before it unveils any of like the real big revelations. But the good news is the movie is blessedly short. It's only 99 minutes long. It zips on by. But there will be some people who are like, get on with it. But I would urge viewers out there just to take a chill pill, wait and see what this movie has to offer. And I think the great majority of viewers will be satisfied by the conclusion. But when you kind of withhold a lot of vital information until the very end, sometimes you can build up the mystery a little bit too much. And when you finally unveil like your magic trick or reveal all your cards, whatever metaphor you want to use, there are going to be some people that are going to say, wait a second, that's it? Or there'll be other people like myself who immediately start picking the story apart and wondering if it makes sense in hindsight. And the answer to that is kinda. I am going to watch this movie again because I feel like it's that powerful and it's that scary and it's that atmospheric where it deserves a second viewing. I'm not entirely convinced that the movie completely sticks to the landing, but that doesn't matter because on a couple occasions over the course of the movie, I was fucking terrified. And when you slap down 20 or 25 bucks to go see a movie and you've driven to the theater or walked to the theater or whatever, you expect to have the pants scared off you. And Keeper absolutely did the job. So Osgood Perkins, man, he is rapidly accumulating a pretty incredible resume. So the question now is, which of the two Perkins do people like more? Because Anthony Perkins...
Do you go out with friends?
Well, a boy's best friend is his mother.
He got to be fucking Norman Bates. He got to be Norman Bates, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. And then was it Carl Franklin who did Psycho 2? Yeah, Richard Franklin directed it, but it was written by Tom Holland, who would go on to direct Fright Night. Tom Holland's fantastic. But I think Psycho and Psycho 2 is one of the great 1-2 punches within the horror genre, because in the first one, you have all these incredible performances, but also astonishing music by Bernard Herrmann and just Alfred Hitchcock at its most devilish and playful. But Psycho 2 just takes the mythology and builds upon it and adds to it. And I thought Psycho 2 just absolutely kicked ass. And there's some people out there, I don't agree with them, but there's some people out there who prefer Psycho 2. In any case, when it comes to discussing great horror dynasties where you have parents whose children also continue to work within that genre, There are not a lot of great examples. Obviously, you have like Stephen King and Joe Hill, and obviously Janet Leigh and Jamie Lee Curtis would be another example. But yeah, what are the great horror dynasties? But I don't know if Osgood Perkins has any kids out there, whether they're young, don't exist, or old or whatever. But if he can keep this going, where if he can encourage the next generation of Perkins to write great horror novels or make great horror video games or whatever the case might be, they will go down in history as one of the great bloodlines within the horror genre. But getting back to the scares of this movie and how they were achieved, I can't remember a single jump scare. And that's hard to do in 2025, where I feel like the entire industry is almost going to kind of like force you into like cramming as many jump scares into your movie as humanly possible. Instead, Osgood Perkins relies upon good old-fashioned technique and suspense and interesting photography and interesting angles where he's constantly misdirecting your attention or obscuring the frame or doing things where you think you know what you're seeing. And it's almost like he's anticipating connoisseurs of the genre to know where the scare might be coming from. So he has to be one step ahead of them, because if you're a fan of the horror genre, it's not like you just see one horror movie a year. If you like horror movies, you probably see like 100 horror movies a year. At this point, you kind of know where all the bodies are buried and you know how these tricks are achieved. So to outwit and outsmart the viewer becomes increasingly challenging. But the photography is so stunningly beautiful, you're just constantly kind of transfixed by the imagery. But like I said, he's obscuring certain parts of the frame. And even usually they'll kind of like dangle something here and then they'll do a reverse and there's something like something that'll make you jump back. And there are a few moments where he does do the reverse angle where there's something terrifying there, but it's not like a cacophonous like boom of music or sound effects or whatever to kind of cheapen it or to kind of fake their way through it. What he shows you is something so disturbing and so unnerving, where you feel just like actress Tatiana Maslany, where some of her reactions to the scares in this movie are just delightful. And the movie, I won't say it's a one-woman show, but for huge chunks of the movie, she's the only person on screen. It's just her in this house or this cabin in the woods, getting increasingly paranoid and frightened and worried by sounds on the roof or things she might have seen out in the woods, and she's just coming unglued. And you really have to bring your A game as an actor or an actress if you expect to maintain and sustain the interest of the audience for the entirety of the movie. You basically need to have a dozen or more frightened expressions in your bag of tricks as an actor. Otherwise, it's just going to be kind of like the same old scares over and over and over again. But Tatiana, she keeps exploring the depths and finding new ways to express her bewilderment and her terror and her fear and anxiety. And she worked with Osgood Perkins also on The Monkey, and she did a great job there as well. So they are rapidly becoming a good team. And speaking of The Monkey, I wanted to bring this to y'all's attention, which I just found out about it on Wikipedia. But in reference to the production of the film Keeper, it says, the film is shot in its entirety while work on The Monkey was held up due to the 2023 Hollywood labor disputes. Several of The Monkey's cast and crew in Canada were trying to find ways to keep working, so Perkins and Ferguson found a Canadian writer who was not part of the Writers Guild of America to write the script. They also hired Canadian actors who could waive their SAG-AFTRA status in order to film. And when I read a story like that, my opinion of a filmmaker like Osgood Perkins, which is already pretty high, it just soars into the stratosphere, because making movies is incredibly challenging. I've worked on a variety of low-budget movies, and no matter how big or small the movie you're working on is, you're always going to face problems. Like every step along the way, there's always going to be something that threatens to completely destroy your movie or postpone your movie or delay your movie or wreck it or whatever the case might be. And Osgood Perkins was faced with the delay on The Monkey. And so he's like, all right, well, fuck it. Let's go to Canada and just make a very, very small, intimate, experimental, very ambitious horror movie. And while maybe The Monkey's more entertaining on the surface or perhaps more accessible, I think Keeper is going to be the movie that people remember more, because you can tell Osgood Perkins is taking advantage of the fact that he's working with a low budget and a very small crew and a very small cast. He's like, fuck it. We can be as experimental and as ambitious as we want to be. And what that reminds me of a little bit is when the Coen brothers were writing Miller's Crossing. Famously, they got writer's block like halfway through the script. Like, we don't know where this is going or how to finish it. So they just pressed pause and they went and wrote Barton Fink, a movie about a playwright who becomes a screenwriter who's wrestling with a lot of similar issues. And Barton Fink ended up becoming one of the most beloved movies, at least as far as like the art house crowd is concerned. And then once they got that out of their system, they went back and they were able to finish Miller's Crossing, which ultimately ended up becoming one of their best movies. But I feel like if you're a novelist or a filmmaker or a video game designer or a musician, never let an obstacle be an excuse to just sit on your thumb and play video games and screw around and goof off. go off and do something else, work on another project. And Osgood Perkins, Osgood's clearly not one of those filmmakers who's willing to rest on his laurels and just coast off the success of Longlegs, which was easily one of the most successful movies that Neon has ever put out there. I mean, that movie had a small budget and a small marketing budget, and it was just a monster runaway success in the summer of 2024. And usually after that, people might get paranoid, like, oh shit, like what do I do next? Because there's no way I'm going to be able to match that success. And usually the answer is just keep working, like just power right on through. Don't worry about the sophomore slump or whatever the case may be. Like when Tarantino made Pulp Fiction, he could have gotten paralysis through over-analysis and spent 5, 6, 7 years trying to figure out what his next movie should be. But instead, he made a slightly lower budget movie with Jackie Brown, and he's got right back to work. And I feel like getting right back to work is usually always the best answer to any problem you might be facing. But getting back to the emotions of fear and anxiety and suspense and dread, around the 2/3 mark with this movie, I noticed that I was starting to get really nervous. I was like picking up my fingernails, even though I kept telling myself to stop. And I suddenly realized, like, if I don't just like chomp down on my teeth, then there's a danger that I might like bite my tongue if and when something scary happens. So I just sat there with my arms crossed and I clenched my teeth. I was like, all right, like hit me with your best shot. Like I'm prepared. And ultimately, I didn't need to bite my teeth in order to avoid chomping on my tongue, because the scares that come in the latter part of the movie, they just kind of creep up on you. Like you'll see an actor looking, toward the camera, and then something is like slowly coming up behind them, which is always a very effective shot. I mean, I first saw Tobe Hooper use that with Salem's Lot, way back in the late 70s or early 80s. I was so young when I first saw it. I don't even know how old I was when I saw it, but it was an incredibly effective shot, and Osgood Perkins does it here. I suspect that Osgood Perkins spent a lot of time studying the great masters of the genre, because his father was directed by one of the great masters of the suspense genre. He was the fucking master of suspense. Like, it's not every day that a director earns a title where they just get to take over an entire emotion, but Hitchcock got to take over the emotion of suspense for all time, and that'll never change. But Osgood Perkins, the question becomes, like, at what point does Osgood Perkins start to be regarded as one of the great directors within the horror genre? And like, the great directors within the horror genre from my lifetime, obviously I would include Tobe Hooper and Sam Raimi and Wes Craven, Clive Barker to a degree, but he's obviously much more of a novelist. Stephen King, obviously much more of a novelist. And obviously you have the incredible filmography of filmmakers like David Cronenberg or John Carpenter. But these guys, they're getting up there in years, and they're not going to be with us forever. So it's like, what is the new generation of horror giants that is starting to take shape? We've been blessed with a lot of great storytellers over the last couple decades who have thrived within the horror genre. And obviously, if you go back to like a bygone era, you've got guys like Todd Browning and James Whale and all those legends, or people like Jacques Tourneur. I mean, with every new era that comes, there's always like a handful of filmmakers who are like exploring the horror genre and taking it in a new direction. But I think right now, Osgood Perkins is one of the good ones. Like Robert Eggers is one of the good ones. Damien Leone is one of the good ones. Damian McCarthy is one of the good ones. And when I compare the strength of the horror genre right now, and more importantly, the originality of the horror genre right now, compared to some of the other genres out there, whether it's science fiction or fantasy or action or superheroes or anything you care to mention, especially when it comes to franchise filmmaking, horror is basically keeping my interest in contemporary movies alive, because I love art house cinema and all that kind of stuff. But in the end, you go to the movies to have a good time. You want to see a good show. And if it wasn't for the strength of the incredible horror movies that have been coming out over the last couple of years, I don't know if I'd go to the movie theater nearly as often as I do. But I think what really helps make this horror movie stand out is that it's not just about the mystery of what's out in the woods threatening this couple in this cabin. Because there are plenty of horror movies where there's something out in the woods and it's coming to get you, and how long can you fend it off before it finally kills you or you escape or whatever. We've seen it a million times, and people will continue to make those cabin in the woods scenarios until the end of time. They're always good fun. But this is a real relationship drama. You probably could have stripped all the horror ingredients out of it and just made it a relationship drama about two people out in a cabin who are trying to figure out, like, do we love each other? Do we like each other? Can we go the distance? What do we want out of this relationship? What ingredients from our past relationships might have a negative impact on our current relationship? What weird, creepy family members might be living in a cabin right across the way who might be threatening and to like intrude upon our happiness, and so on and so forth. But like, it's a real deal, adult, mature relationship drama, and then all the horror ingredients are kind of getting sprinkled in, and you're like, ooh, all right, I got it. This movie's working on multiple levels. So yeah, it's nice to see a horror movie that's about more than just cheap scares. But I've been so complimentary of this movie so far. I feel like I owe it to you to have one major criticism before I wrap up this video. I don't think the explanation or kind of the exposition at the end completely, totally makes sense. Like, the more I think about it, and admittedly, during like the final like 10 or 15 minutes, I was, totally enthralled. I was like, holy shit, what the fuck is going on? So it's a fantastic ending. But when it comes to assembling this big giant puzzle from all the pieces in the box, maybe there are a few pieces that are missing, or maybe there are a few extra pieces that don't quite fit into the overall scheme, where I don't know if it's going to withstand like intense, aggressive scrutiny. And I'm trying to be as vague as humanly possible so as not to spoil anything. But I think the ending and the explanation and the backstory and it all works well enough. Like I said before, if you explain a mystery, inevitably some people are going to say, "Oh, that's it? That's all you got?" But if he hadn't got offered any explanation, perhaps it would have remained an incredibly profound, disturbing, mysterious experience, but people might have been even more frustrated. You can definitely back yourself into a corner as a storyteller when you keep a secret, your cards close to your chest right up until the last few minutes of the movie. So, yeah, to be continued. I'm definitely going to watch this movie again. But this is a very safe bet for one of my top 10 favorite movies of 2025. And admittedly, I think I've seen more movies in 2025, or more new movies in 2025 than in any other year of my life. And it hasn't necessarily been that strong of a year of movies. Like, there have been a lot of movies that are pretty good or strong contenders, but Keeper, I think, is a pretty safe bet, will be in that top 10. Definitely one of the stronger horror movies of the year. I guess that's the question. What is the best horror movie of 2025? I will get to that when I get to my top 10 video of 2025 next month. But Keeper is definitely in the mix. In any case, let me know what you think down in the comments below. Am I being too slow to declare Osgood Perkins the next big horror director, or does he need to give us one or two more before he can kind of hang with the giants of his craft? He's definitely one of the best horror directors right now, but like I said before, Damian McCarthy, he's my favorite, and he's got another one on the way. But he did Oddity and Caveat, and Caveat's one of those movies where for like the first 2/3 or 3/4, it's like, what is this? This isn't even a horror movie. Nothing's happening. Then the ending was so good, I was like afraid to go to the bathroom at night without like turning on a light. Like, Caveat really sticks the landing at the end, but who knows? Maybe Osgood Perkins is studying the films of Damian McCarthy as well, and maybe one day they'll collaborate. One will produce the other's movie, or vice versa. Who knows what the future might hold? But like, once again, as I said before, hooray for horror. Horror is keeping me sane. In the absence of horror, I would just spend a lot more time reading books and playing video games. Both worthy uses of one's time, but I am first and foremost a movie lover, and I just always love having a good excuse to go back to the theater. And I'll be back at the theater tomorrow to check out The Running Man. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you like this video, please consider liking, subscribing, hitting that notification bell. But I hope everybody has a great weekend at the movies, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.